It's great to be here. Thanks for joining this morning. I have the pleasure today to be on stage with two of our very best MVPs, Tony Redmond and Benjamin. I'm Amit Gupta from the product development team building Office 365 groups based out of Microsoft Redmond. Hopefully, some of you were able to attend the overview session yesterday where we talked about the various use cases for how you can use groups for collaboration in your organization. Many of you are already using groups, but looking for more information how to further collaboration in your organization using groups. You have questions, and that's why you are here. You're figuring out how to deploy groups, how to manage them, how to bring the compliance and the policy requirements of your company to abide and put them into the groups as well. You have a hybrid environment and wondering, how can I deploy and use groups in those settings? You are a SharePoint person in the room and wondering, what's about team site and groups? Well, we have the two very best from the industry, and they can share their experiences on what they're hearing from our customers, from what they're learning from their partners, and provide you with some of the answers to those questions and guide you with this ultimate field guide session on groups. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Tony and Benjamin.
Thanks, Amit. Hey, good morning. Oh my gosh, we got the crowd in today, huh? Okay, so Benjamin, he's going to do all the SharePoint-y type things because he doesn't trust me with documents. On the other hand, I absolutely don't trust him with email. So we got a nice split down the line. But first, before we plunge into the details of groups and what people are using them for and how to manage them and all that sort of good stuff, I just wanted to talk a little bit, set some context, and realize that Microsoft, for years and years and years, has been trying to do collaboration. And most of the time, collaboration has not been well done. And I think one of the reasons why is because Microsoft has generally designed things within the boundaries of a single application. So Exchange did collaboration, and SharePoint did collaboration, and anything else that came along might have done collaboration. But until groups came along, I don't think there was really an attempt to say, let's look across everything we've got, all the assets, and let's try and build a new way of doing it. So we've been down the lines of public folders, and they were okay. Site mailboxes were an absolute disaster, are an absolute disaster. SharePoint team sites, yeah, they do a good job in certain contexts. And Yammer also does a good job in certain contexts, mostly in large-scale enterprise. But none of these have really become, I think, the go-to collaboration vehicle that people have wanted. One of the nice things, though, that we have learned is that email distribution groups remain the single biggest type or method of collaboration across the entire Office 365 community. They've been used since day one in email, and they've been used, they're still in heavy use today. And I think one of the nice things about groups is that it builds off that heritage. But the thing we've got to realize is that distribution groups are not a collaboration vehicle. They're just simply a way of getting email around to the right people. Now, Mr. SharePoint.
Thank you, Tony. Hi, everyone. How's everybody doing? Good? Awesome. So again, thanks for joining. I'm super excited because in the SharePoint space, I am thrilled to be able to see a team site, full-blown team site, connected to groups. And I'll tell you why, because we've seen some pretty interesting things. I've seen some pretty interesting things. Team sites are an intranet under the central administration console. Some of the things that we've seen in SharePoint hasn't always been good in the way that it's been used. The reason is that we were confused. Is it a platform that I build with? Is it a product that I use in my team? So there was a lot of, the way we've used it in many, many scenarios, it's been team sites, a place for my team to go and work together. And we've had a new team site for each project, for every team. And essentially, that's how we've been using it quite a bit. We've also used it, unfortunately, a lot for file dumps. We would go to our file shares, lift it up, and bring it to one giant team site. And that didn't necessarily bring any value. And what we did on top of that is we started, I love saying this because I've seen it, torturing SharePoint, right? Because the team would get their SharePoint team site and then they would try to make the calendar, the SharePoint calendar, do all kinds of things that are not meant to be in the SharePoint calendar, right? There's an Outlook calendar and I happen to really like it. So there's been a lot of that going on, and while we've been using this product and tortured it to do conversations inside of a team site, tortured it to try and do calendar, to try and do all these other things, there's something that's been happening in our industry, right? We've got IT, we've got us, and we've got the business users as well. And in the past, it's been relatively easy. I could put anything I wanted, and my users had to use it, right? Not everyone was tech savvy before. Or like, here's a SharePoint site, 2007, that's what you're gonna use, and that's that, have a good day. Then I just focused on upgrading my server every other year. SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, now I saw they've got SharePoint 2016, I'm gonna go to SharePoint 2016, but hold on a second. That's not the reality anymore today. There are things happening. It's happened to my own organization. I went to see a customer recently. He's like, Ben, I think we have a problem. Our users are using YouTube private channels to be able to have video streaming on all devices, adjusting to the bandwidth that they have. If I want to set that up, I don't know how. I'm going to try and do it in SharePoint, and again, torture it to do something I didn't necessarily need to do. So while this has been happening and while users had to follow us, now you've got products coming out of the internet like it's new Starbucks. All over the place, Slack and Facebook and all these other things that they are using behind our backs, and they're storing their content there, right? We've got some using Evernote. That's great, but how do I get it when you leave? How do I get all of that information and keep it for our team? So those were some very big questions we were asking ourselves. And I was very, very happy to see that we didn't have to go through that anymore. And that's where I'm going to let Tony introduce the Office 365 groups and why we went this way for many of our customers and how we had to manage them.
Thanks, Benjamin. So you've seen some of the problems we got with email, just distribution groups, and Benjamin's put out a good case for why SharePoint, even though it's a great tool in the right circumstances, maybe not the right tool in all circumstances. Now we've got this thing we call groups. And the phrase up on the board there, a unique collaboration fabric. That's a splendid phrase, isn't it? Nobody really knows who came up with it, but it's a splendid phrase anyway, and we'll continue it. What it actually means is that for the first time across an Office suite like Office 365, you have the ability to start building on the basis of common components that draw in from lots of other workloads. So, to define it a little bit more. First thing, it's a unified identity. Doesn't belong to Exchange, it doesn't belong to SharePoint, doesn't belong to Yammer, doesn't belong to anything except Azure Active Directory. So it's a group object in Azure Active Directory. That group object provides a unique identity for the group, and all the members of the group share that unique identity. It draws functionality from across the service. So the two basic things right out of the box, a little bit of Exchange in terms of an Exchange mailbox, a group mailbox that contains the inbox folder that's used for conversations and the group calendar folder, and a little bit of SharePoint, because we've got to have somewhere to put files and to store the shared notebook, and very soon, team sites. right? But the more important thing is that Groups, in the 2 years since it's been launched, has become a platform for integration where people say, hey, here's a unique identity. The unique identity represents a set of users. I can use that to control access to all sorts of different things, right? Like Power BI, Dynamics CRM, Planner, and more coming. We saw yesterday there was an announcement between Microsoft and Workday, which put Office 365 Groups right at the center of that. Then there is the connectors that we'll talk about later on, which brings data in to Groups and makes it available for people just to see a snapshot of data, what's happening out there on the net, so they can go and find more information if they need it. There's a REST-based API, and there's integrations with Skype for Business too, which allows Groups to be used as the basis for calls. So that's a very basic definition of it. Talk about group membership a little bit more. 3 types of people. Owners, the folks who can take administrative access. Members, people who have Office 365 accounts in your tenants, and now people who are outside of your tenant, and we'll show about that in a little while. We'll talk about how all that external access stuff works and the control you have over. And then there's a third list called subscribers. Well, subscribers are just members, but they're actually members who have elected to get updates from the group by email. So folks that live and die by Outlook, for example, will probably be subscribers because they want to get everything coming in through email. Really critical point. All group members share the same level of access to all resources. You don't have differentiated access inside the SharePoint document library to documents. Everybody's got the same level of access, including external members. Right? Groups can be private, or they can be public. Public groups can be joined by anybody. Private groups, no. Somebody has to be approved before they can join. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And also groups can be hidden, because some of those private groups you probably don't want to show up. For example, if you're working on some sort of merger or acquisition project, and you have a group that share documents about it, you probably don't want that one showing up when people start browsing. They might get a shock. What does this all mean? First thing, groups are born in the cloud. They are a child of the cloud. They do not belong on premises. The unique collaboration fabric that groups use is built from the cloud. They're not Exchange. They're not SharePoint. They don't belong to anything. They stand on their own. So if you start saying, oh yeah, it's just a bit of Exchange because it's got a mailbox, yeah, it's right. Yeah, it's got a bit of a mailbox. But it's much more than the mailbox. And the same thing if you look at it from the SharePoint site and say, hey, it's got a team site. It's got a document library. It must be SharePoint. Yeah, it does. But it's got a lot more. You've got to get your head around that. Very important point. Groups are managed using their own tools, on their own merit. They're not managed through Exchange. They're not managed through SharePoint. So you have to change your administrative practices. Your processes about how you set things up, how you allocate control over these things, they're going to change because they're now dealing with a different type of entity. In terms of targeting, what's a good target for a group? Well, the ideal target out of the box right now is probably a team that is quite email-centric. They send a lot of email to communicate together, which is relatively inefficient when you think about it. Because when new people join the group, they won't get all of the information that appeared before, that people discussed before. This is one of the reasons why in the Exchange world, public folders have existed for so long. Because what we do is we'd add a public folder as an archive to a distribution group. And then when somebody came along and joined that group, they could go to the public folder and go and find all of the previous discussions. Well, with an Office 365 group out of the box, once you become a member, you see everything, right? So that's good. You can replace that kind of email-based distribution, communication, collaboration with a group. Another good use case is a small group of people, 10, 20, 30 people, who need to collaborate around documents. Because Groups does a really nice job of dealing with document collaboration. Does a really nice job. To set up this event, we had people from Microsoft, Benjamin and myself, so 3 different tenants working around a single document library, multiple versions of this, that, and the other thing, and we got it done. And it all worked out of the box. It was really good. It's not so good, though, if you want to scale up. And Benjamin's going to he'll talk about some of the limitations that exist. But basically, if you've got a very large membership, you're a 50,000 user company, you're not going to stuff that into an Office 365 group. That's something that Yammer is better at. Right? Or even a simple distribution list. Something like a dynamic distribution, a much better choice. Okay? Second thing, if you want granular permissions, remember what I said earlier, everybody in a group shares the same level of access. So if you want to lock down permissions on something, don't go near Groups, because you will be going against one of its fundamental principles, that everybody has access at the same level. And the third thing, I think, if you've got large-scale dynamic groups, and that's something like the all companies are, everybody in a large geography, everybody in the UK, everybody in Germany, everybody in France that works for the company, I wouldn't go near Groups for that, because again, I don't think you get the value. And as we'll see later on, there are some technical things that will get in the way. If you use nested distribution groups in Exchange, stay with them as well. Don't go near Groups, and we'll find out why in a little while. Okay, Benjamin's got some thoughts now on other stuff.
Other stuff, thank you.
Other stuff.
Fun story, we were talking about the secret groups or private groups. And at the office a couple of months ago, we created this group because we were discussing something a little private. Maybe somebody was going to not be here anymore in the company. Guys, be sure that when you create a private group, you also go and put it hidden if you want it to be hidden. The capability exists. All right? There's a lot of management capabilities available through PowerShell. So definitely check that out. Just wanted to add that was a fun story. Not so fun. Fun to talk about today. So I want to talk to you about preparing usage guidelines. And I don't just mean governance. That governance word gets thrown around everywhere. Oh, you need governance. Oh, okay, thank you. Have a good... No. And governance does not mean policing. It means guiding people to use what you're making available the right way for your organization. And there is a very important message I want to tell you, if I may. Groups is here for a very important reason. I was explaining earlier that our end users, our business users, are going to get the work done however they can. And if they can't get it from you because it's too complicated, they'll go elsewhere. It's easy, often it's free, and they don't have to request permission. And with your usage guidelines, at some point in time, you'll have to decide who gets to create the Office 365 groups. Who is allowed? By default, it's everyone in the organization. I happen to like that. I'll tell you why. If I start blocking it down, I go back to that same problem where all users will bypass me again. So yes, you can identify who is going to create your Office 365 groups, and yes, you can specify or lock it down. What I recommend you do is not necessarily isolate that to only IT, because then you're going to go back to that problem we've been having. What you want to identify is your power users, people in the various business units. You want them to be the go-to people of their teams to be able to go create groups. They have the training and they'll be able to decide, yes, you'll need another group. Actually, no, all you need is a new document library in your existing one. But you definitely want to find that line where you're controlling too much and you're empowering your team and your colleagues to do the work that they need to get done. So usage guidelines have to be there. We have to know, as people creating groups or using groups, what we are allowed to do, what is available. Are external guests available? Are they locked down? Who can create these? And many different options. We'll see that usage guidelines can also be integrated. Wow, I did a little animation there. Usage guidelines can also be integrated directly in the creation of the group. So when I create this new group as an end user, if I empower other people in my organization to create these groups, I can help them. I can put any link to anything. Personally, I'd say go SharePoint, a little SharePoint page with all the usage guidelines, but you can use anything you want. That's the beauty of it. And what's fun about this is that you can see on the right-hand side as well, Microsoft added something that I'm actually very excited about, the classification of the group. Remember that the group is that thing that links all the products together for that team. So when that team at the office starts a new project, they can classify it in however way that you've specified for your organization. I've done it by our divisions at the office, but it could be as top secret, confidential. And if you were in Jeff Teeper's session on the vision and roadmap of SharePoint, they discussed the ability to assign policies to these classifications. So that would be very exciting to see. Now, usage guidelines doesn't just mean you put a link and you're good to go. You're gonna have to do some training of power users. That is vital. And I don't mean sending them a PDF or a PowerPoint. Right? Whether it's gonna be in-class training, what we've found to be very successful in the age of I can no longer pay attention for more than 5 minutes, is the ability to create short videos. Put them on your Office 365 video portal, right? Small little bits, 2-3 minute videos. How to use this, how to create a group, how to use the new document library. You can easily adapt videos. You can download any of these tools that record your screen, or you can take your phone, put it on a stand. We've bought something on Amazon for like $80. We got a green screen camera to the stand to hold our camera, and we had our video training capsules. Very successful with these, and easy to update, because Office 365 is gonna update frequently. And that's gonna happen. We have to keep up. We have to offer our business users the same things that are gonna become more frequently available on the internet. Short little video capsules is very easy to update. However, long Word documents and PDFs with screenshots could be a little less fun. The next thing I would recommend is a little SharePoint wiki. Wiki means quick. So you can link pages and create them as you go to provide these guidelines to your end users, and they can go to it to get more of that information. And of course, you can create your own app. You can go into Power App, combine it with Flow, and create a request approval to create an Office 365 group that will go to the right person in your organization that can create the Office 365 groups. You don't have to make it a terrible experience for them. Yes, you want to control who can create these groups. That's fine, I understand that, especially in large-scale organizations. But a Power App that's on everyone's phone, they can open up on their phone, request a new Office 365 groups, goes directly to their manager using the profile properties, the user properties. I've tested it. It's pretty easy to do, actually. So there's a lot to do. However, Office 365 groups don't come without limitations, and you should know about them. Lucky for us, there's no limitations on how many groups you can be a member of. But you should know, as an end user, not the administrator, but as an end user, you can create a maximum of 250 groups. There can be no more than 10 owners for each group. And this is important because you're centralizing membership. that's going to get assigned to multiple products, right? So if you add a user in a group, they have access to the SharePoint, they have access to the calendar, they have access to Planner. If you wanted to give access people to read only in your SharePoint, then perhaps they're not a member of your group. Perhaps you should manage the permissions in your SharePoint site. We'll get to that later on. And of course, there is a maximum number of group members that you should be aware of. Right? If you go, well, I shouldn't say that actually. Microsoft guys are like, what are you saying? I'm just making sure they're awake, you know? No, there's no limitation, but you will see degradation of performance when you go over 1,000. But think about it. A group with over 1,000 members, perhaps you might want to divide that into smaller teams or smaller groups as well. So with that, I'm going to let Tony go back into deploying and managing groups because there's a lot of capabilities there.
Thanks, Benjamin. Okay. So we just focus now on a little bit of the practical stuff. How do you deploy and manage these groups? How do you take control of them, et cetera, et cetera? So first thing, what tools are available to you? Well, there is the Admin Center, Office 365 Admin Center. You can certainly create groups through there. You can amend their properties and all of that. There's the OWA People section. You can go and create groups there. You can create groups through Azure Active Directory. Or you can do the real way through PowerShell. The only way to do it is through PowerShell. No, that's not true. I actually always create them through the GUI. I just can't remember. I'm a bit old now. I can't remember all of the parameters. Anyway, there are 4 ways of doing it to administer. There are multiple ways of actually creating groups, though, as we'll find out later on. This is how you administer them. So what happens when groups get created? Well, we said that they're a child of the cloud, so they go into the cloud directory, which is AAD. But the workloads have got other directories. They've got workload-specific directories. So Exchange has EXODS. And EXODS then is distributed across Exchange forests. SharePoint has SPODS. And the reason why the workload-specific directories exist is it allows specific attributes that are important to those workloads to be stored in that directory and not clutter up AAD. But because we've got several directories involved, we've got a little bit of synchronization to happen. So the first thing that happens is that AAD broadcasts out to Exchange online and says, hey, Exchange, we need a new group mailbox. And the reason why the group mailbox is created first is to allow conversations to start happening. At the same time, SharePoint is also notified because SharePoint is going to have to create a document library, it's going to have to create a notebook, et cetera, et cetera. However, SharePoint doesn't do that until the first user goes and attempts to do something with that document library. And that's simply just to restrain the use of resources. Okay? So we've got a couple of immediate rights, and we've got a notification, and so forth and so on. Now, things can go wrong inside multiple directories when you've got synchronization involved. So there are various background processes that make sure that everything gets synchronized and all of the directories have the same information and so forth and so on. Okay, so that's how it happens on the directory side. How do people create new groups? Well, there's lots of ways. And by default, anybody can create one of these groups. I don't like that very much. I complained about this a lot when groups came out first. The guys from Microsoft had holes bored in their heads with my whining and complaints because I'm an old Exchange guy. And I remember when public folders were released in 1996, 20 years ago. And at the same time, Microsoft came out and they said, you know what? Anybody can create a public folder. Have a good time. There are no permissions on the root public folder. 20 years later, 20 years, 20 long, bitter, horrible years later, we still have chaos in public folder hierarchies today. So I don't want you to have chaos with your groups. So think about whether or not you want to put some control on people creating groups. I think you do. And there's lots of ways they can do it. They can do it from Outlook, they can do it from OWA, they can do it from PowerShell, they can do it from SharePoint, they can do it from Planner, from Power BI. Oh my gosh, there's so many ways to create a group. It gets very tiring. In some respects, it doesn't really matter how many groups exist. After all, you've paid Microsoft for Office 365 licenses. They provide the resources, so have at it. But if you do that, think about how cluttered your directory is going to be in about 2 months. And think about how many of those groups that have been created by users in that period will actually be used. Okay? They are the big things to think about. So we have a group creation policy. Now, in fact, today we're in the middle of a transition period. So we have 2 policies. The history of it was, when groups first came out, the first client was OWA. And the first target audience was really the Exchange audience, I guess. So a pretty logical decision saying, oh, how are we going to control groups? Bright idea. Let's put a setting in the OWA mailbox policy to control groups. And that's fine, and it's still used today to control group creation for OWA and Outlook 2016. The big problem about putting anything in a workload-specific configuration is that all of the other products, like Planner, or Power BI, or Dynamics CRM, they don't know anything about Exchange. They don't want to know anything about Exchange. OWA figures in their nightmares. They're never going to go near this setting. So of course, even if you block something with OWA, those guys are just going to ignore the block. They don't care. Have at it. Create as many groups as you like. So the solution is to raise the bar up and to say, well, remember, it's a child of the cloud. It's governed by an AAD object, so it makes a lot of sense to put control in AAD. And that's what we're in the middle of doing right now. Some workloads will use the AAD policy. Some workloads continue to use the OWA policy. So for the moment, you just have to have a mixture of the both, okay? Anyway, so the new policy controls Planner, Dynamics CRM, Power BI, and Outlook groups. And we'll see how that works in a moment. The basic idea, and we're going to get into PowerShell very soon. I feel the excitement in the room. PowerShell and AAD, oh, what a combination. Anyway, so the basic idea is you create this policy in the form of a directory settings object. And part of the properties for that object points to a group, another group. It can be a distribution group, it can be an Office 365 group, or it can be a security group. And the members of that group are the only people that are going to be allowed to create new groups. Sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Yeah? Does it work? Admit, at least you should say it works. Okay, it works. It works, okay. So now we get to the PowerShell stuff. This looks horrible. I know it looks horrible, but it's all written down on the web. You can find it. The important thing is, look, very simple. Connect to Azure AD. Boom. Right? Retrieve the existing policy. Okay? And then go and set a couple of settings. One is enable group creation. Set it to false. So that stops everybody else going and creating it. And then tell Azure AD who is allowed to do this. And off you go. And then you've got a policy. Does everybody believe me? It works? Okay? You can also update the same policy now to include things like usage guidelines and classifications. And again, these are the values. I don't expect anybody to write this down. It's an eyesore, it's an eye test or whatever. You'll be able to get the slides later on and get it off there, and it's all on the internet anyway. Okay? So that's how it's done. Now, we got another policy, and I'll come back and I'll show you this in the demo, by the way. We got another policy to think about, and that is a group naming policy. Now, unfortunately, this still exists inside Exchange. Okay? So it doesn't apply to all workloads, but that's going to change as well. Again, just because it seemed to make sense at the time, it was a short-term decision or whatever you want to say about it, the guys who are developing this said, we will use the existing naming policy for distribution list. We'll just pick up the same one, and that's what it is. And basically this means that if a policy is in place, any new group created by a user will have this naming policy applied to it. The naming policy is not applied to administrator-created groups because administrators are supposed to know what they're doing. Okay? But that's the way it works. Now, let's see. So I'll come back. Let me just have a look at this. Well, let's do a little bit of a demo. Because can we ship this to 5? Okay. So I got a user here, Jody Smith, and let's do PowerShell first, shall we? Okay. I want to show you first that there are a number of OWA policies in this organization. There are 3, in fact. One of them is called OWA Full Access, and OWA Full Access is the one that's going to give me access to groups. Other people might have OWA policy default, and that may not be the one that they would like to have, but anyway. So, if we go and look at Jody Smith, we see that Jody Smith has got the default policy. Well, if we look, if we look at Ben Owens, he has the full access. So, what does this mean? Well, it means that if we go here to Jody, if I go to groups, you see there's no plus sign. There's no way to add a group with here. It doesn't show it to you. Now, you can go to Discover, and Discover gives you the ability to create a group, or so you think. You're lulled into a false sense of security. But if I say create, it tells me no, go away. Boil your head, you can't do it. Right? So that's how the OWA policy works. By comparison, okay, if I go over to Ben Owens has a plus sign here, right? So remember, he had the full policy applied to him, which allows him to do anything. So if he says create, yep, he can go ahead and create a group. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Now, these guys also might want to use Planner. So if I go here to, okay, here's Planner. Now you see Planner for Jody Smith, who is being blocked by OWA, offers Jody the opportunity to create a new plan. However, if I click, not going to happen. Why? That's where the AAD policy has clicked in. So we have 2 policies controlling different experiences, client experience. Thank you very much, Benjamin. There you go. The intention long term is that these come together, and then you'll be able to just have one to manage. But that's the way it is today. Now, if we look behind the scenes, oh, no, that's not what I wanted to do. What I want to do here, come back here. Get MSOL settings. This is the thing that show that this is the AAD policy, okay? And the important things that we see here, for example, is that enable group creation, you see is set to false, right? And then you can see that we've got group creation allowed group ID. That's a horrible name. And then it's followed by one of these GUIDs. I don't know, Microsoft programmers love GUIDs. They never think that human beings don't think like GUIDs. I think they all have a brain transplant when they join Microsoft or something. They have a GUID translator built in or something like that. But anyway, so they like GUIDs. We don't like GUIDs. How do you find out what that value should be? Well, that's where you'd use something like this. And again, I'll show it to you. It's a little PowerShell commandlet where you use a search string and you put in a human-friendly name, which is like permitted to add Office 365 groups, and that's going to return you the object ID, which is that horrible GUID thing that we just looked at a moment ago. So that's how it all works. Okay, let's go back to that one, and we'll go back in. Now, one, isn't it? Three, oh, sorry. You can never have too many technologists trying to look at technology and failing abysmally. Now, there's a possibility that you might not do a good job of controlling group creation. And if you don't do that, you'll end up with inactive groups. Inactive groups are groups that just don't do anything, right? Microsoft is working on a life cycle management technology that they hope to deliver later on. I think they announced it yesterday that they're working towards the end of the year, so that'd be great. But at the moment, there's no way of finding out these lingering inactive groups. But there is. If you go to TechNet Gallery, there's a script there. And what the script does, it basically goes and checks the audit records for Office 365, finds out whether any SharePoint activity has occurred, and it goes and it checks Exchange to see if any conversation activity occurred, and if not, it's an inactive group and we move forward. So that's the way it works. It's all very easy. In terms of compliance though, this is kind of important because we could start now assembling an awful lot of information in these groups, right? And you want to make sure that you're able to have a close eye on what happens. As it happens, over the last couple of months, there have been a number of important changes made in the Security and Compliance Center, which is the SCC acronym that's used here, which will allow you to go and control groups better. So now Exchange eDiscovery and in-place holds work. Retention policies still don't work, may happen in the future. Or as we learned yesterday in a session, there's a new thing called classification policies that are coming along that may solve the problem for us. SharePoint eDiscovery cases support searching through the group document libraries and the team sites, but of course they will ignore Exchange. However, if you're going to do content searches, if you're going to do eDiscovery searches, don't use Exchange or SharePoint. Instead, use the content searches that are available through the Security and Compliance Center. They're much faster, they retrieve information much more quickly, and they will find anything that's stored in a group. Okay? Preservation policies work, and they can be used to lock down content in groups. However, they, I believe, are going to be also replaced by the new classification policies that are coming. Okay? And the eDiscovery cases that are in the Security and Compliance Center, they also support groups as valid sources. So really, compliance is pretty good right now. I'd also mention that Microsoft is working on a thing called Unified DLP policies. DLP right now is a bit fragmented because you've got policies that work for Exchange that are implemented through transport rules, and you've got others that work through SharePoint, which work through the crawler and the indexer and that kind of stuff. Unified DLP policies will work for groups right out of the box, so that's pretty good. Secret groups. We said that earlier. Groups can be hidden from the GAL, and you can also hide the membership of the groups. So you have to do this through PowerShell, set unified group, there you go. The caveat for this, okay, is that you should really make these groups private as well. If you hide a group and it's public, it's still not very private. It's still not very secret, it's still not very secret. So you should really do a couple of things. You should go and set the address list from hidden from address list enabled. That will stop the address list showing us, so it won't show up on groups address list, it won't show up on the GAL, etc. Hidden group members enabled will hide the group membership, and then make sure that that group is private. However, when you do this, of course, then the people who actually access these groups may find it difficult in the clients to get back to those groups. So it's a good idea to mark them as favorites and they can always go back, okay? Dynamic groups. Dynamic groups are available, they are supported, they work in much the same way as dynamic email groups. However, the big caveat here is that they can only be managed through AAD, and you require an AAD premium license to use it. Now, this is a bit of an issue, I think. It may not be an issue for your tenant, by the way, if you're using an E5 license or you're using AD premium for something, some other reason. But let's say that you're a standard E3 tenant, and you decide that you want to use dynamic groups. The rule is that any user account that comes under the scope of a query executed for a dynamic group must have an AAD premium license. So imagine the scenario. I go and I create a dynamic group for the entire company. And the scope of that query is 10,000 accounts. I have just created a potential liability for myself for $60,000 a month. This is $6 a user for AAD premium. So you may want to think about that. Okay, Benjamin, pass it to you.
Well, thank you. All right, so I want to talk to you about something a little different. And you may think, oh, it's not for me, it sounds complicated. Multi-domain support, that must be for the bigger companies. Not necessarily, right? There are many situations where in your organization, you may have multiple email addresses, right? You may have one for certain divisions. Maybe you're a product company, and you'll have different emails based on the products. In fact, that's our case. And this is something that's happened to us actually very recently. We have the default domain, which cannot be a federated domain in Office 365. So what that means is, whatever is your default domain, whenever an Office 365 group is created, you'll see that it says, this is your group ID. It's the name of the group without spaces at that default domain. What happens is, and this is very interesting, because, you know, of course, our CEO and probably many other CEOs decided that I don't want that to be the group ID URL anymore, change it. But it can't really be done. You can have different email addresses for groups. They can send and receive under different email addresses or different domains that you have, but the group ID that is generated, that's a little bit more difficult. Now, all of this set up, and I'm not going to go over the configurations, that's going to require some PowerShell. What is interesting, especially in the education space, but not just, is the ability to provide policies, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, to say, you know what? If somebody comes from the department marketing, create the group with the SMTP address marketing.contoso.com. But if the user that is creating the Office 365 group comes from another department based on their properties, based on their user properties, so you can, in the education space, have the students create groups in the SMTP domain, say students.contoso.com, and then you can have the teachers create in teachers or faculty.contoso.com. And of course, you can apply that to your own organization and your reality there. That brings me to another challenge. And thankfully, the Office 365 group team announced something very, very, very exciting this week. And it looks like nothing, so I put it all the way at the top here. Soft delete for Office 365 groups. So if you're just starting today with Office 365 groups because you're excited about the connected SharePoint site and all of these new exciting things coming our way, you'll notice that if you try to delete the group, it'll give you a little warning. Are you sure? Because it's going to be gone. What is an Office 365 group? We've mentioned it's just a list of people. But it goes and creates things in different products and links it to that group ID. So the backup is really of these individual products. And as of today, there isn't really a backup solution for your Office 365 group itself. The group, all of its properties, all of the things inside each of these products. So you'll have to be aware of this. Thankfully, with the soft delete, when we're going to create and delete an Office 365 group rather, we'll have a chance to gain it back and restore it within that 30-day period. So just be mindful of that. I'll move along to the clients. How can you access your Office 365 groups? And that is a very, very important part of working with groups, because the idea is that as a team, I can be on the go, anywhere, on any device, and still work with everyone. So of course, there's Outlook 2016's desktop client. You know what? I thought I would never leave that tool. I thought for sure I'll always have that installed. I actually do have it installed, but I'm scared of opening it because I don't know for how long it's going to sync. Because the place to be, in my opinion, is the web app, is Outlook Web. Because all of the latest and greatest appears there. In fact, I have the ability, when I'm using Office 365 Group on Outlook Web, when I'm adding members to the group, man, I don't want to do that one by one. Through there, I have the ability to specify a distribution list, for example, and automatically it's going to expand to the individual users and allow me to add them to the Office 365 group as members, allowing me to essentially convert them. The desktop client has to be Office 365 Pro Plus or Click to Run. And I'm not going to go over some of the details, but whenever you favorite your Office 365 groups, the beauty is that they will be available as favorites across the suite of products that you can use. Now, a lot of us have started using Macs in the office, and though Outlook 2016 for Mac is very close to Outlook 2016 for Windows, it still doesn't have support for groups. It has been on the roadmap, and they are working on it, but you should be mindful of that if you're starting tomorrow and have a lot of Mac users. But again, we have the web version. My favorite, I say that a lot, they're all my favorites, but the app, the mobile app, and this week they've announced that it's now available on the iPad as well. Tony, I think you were telling me you're actually very happy about that, weren't you? What was that?
Yeah, my bad eyes don't accommodate smartphones.
Wants the big screen to use the Office 365 groups. It is very, very, very valuable. Now, the Outlook app, or the Outlook groups that you'll find on your different mobile devices, Apple iOS, Android, Windows 10 mobile, I'm gonna have to say that it's my favorite experience for your conversations. It flows very nicely, but on top of that, right from the palm of your hands, you can go ahead and view, interact with the groups, maintain the membership, access what you need to do. And for those of you familiar with, say, Facebook and Facebook Messenger, they're two different apps. Nowadays, I'm jumping between the apps that are provided. In fact, my phone is just Microsoft apps from the productivity suite. I'm starting in my group, I'm having conversations. Then I can jump to the files and I can see the file I want to work with. It opens up the Word app on my phone or my iPad. Maybe I'll jump to my SharePoint mobile app nowadays to be able to see them as well and access my team news announced this week. No matter where I am and no matter what device I'm using, it works. Now, hybrid is most commonly used with the email piece. So I'm gonna let Tony come and explain this a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, with 20 minutes to go and 30 slides, you've got to stop talking. You're talking too much about SharePoint, something like that. Okay, hybrid connectivity is really important in the email world because of the fact that so many large enterprises run hybrid configurations. But the thing again to remember, Office 365 groups, they are this child of the cloud, so they are always going to be in AAD. So what we're really talking about here is being able to synchronize them back to on-premises Exchange so they can be used in some way, shape, or form. The most fundamental way is to be able to represent them in the on-premises GAL so that you can at least address those groups. They show up as standard distribution lists and so forth and so on. So a couple of things. You're going to have to make sure that your hybrid environments are up to date. You're going to have to use AAD Connect. You're going to have to make sure that the write-back option is enabled if you want to be able to update group membership and so forth and so on. But I could rabbit on this for years, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to point you to TechNet. It's probably best to do that because otherwise we're going to use up an awful lot of time here, and we don't have it. Because it's time for SharePoint again.
Finally, the good piece. I'm a SharePoint guy. Do I
got
care
6 minutes
about
to do
groups?
this. SharePoint in 6 minutes.
Yes. This is the biggest question. In fact, that was me first up 18 months ago at Ignite saying, what are you guys doing with groups? Are you killing my SharePoint team site? Is it still a question today? I hear it often. People contacting, I am using SharePoint. Is group taking over my SharePoint? What's going on? Should I stop using SharePoint? So is this even still a question? Well, let me tell you right here, right now, it's not a question at all. Groups are a list of people, and we're going to connect to that list of people a full-blown SharePoint site collection using the new modern experience. So this is no longer really a question, but there are things to know. This is what it was. If you're using groups, this is what you've got. Every time you created an Office 365 group, you would get a hidden site collection. But you wouldn't have access to the SharePoint site collection. What you would have access is this, a document library, and that's it, the files experience. And that was very valuable, and often what I would say is sometimes you don't need the complexity of SharePoint with content types and metadata and managed metadata and all of that stuff that comes with SharePoint. Sometimes you're in a team of people and you just want to get the work done. You just want a place to store your files. And that's still going to be here. But announced yesterday, they've made an even, I've been excited, thrilled to be able to talk about it finally. Now, for every Office 365 group, the Files tab will allow you to see all the files of that group. The mail attachments, the documents in the SharePoint document library, all in one simple view that gives you all the information that you want and a quick jump to it. Files for your group is when you just want to go to your files and that's it. The site of the group is when you'll go to your Office 365 SharePoint site collection. And this is how it's going to work. But you should be mindful on the impact on membership that it does. So first, groups in SharePoint. Every SharePoint team site collection gets a group. Every group gets a team site collection. There is no longer any difference. If you're creating a new site collection, it creates a group. If you create a group, it creates a site collection. If you create a planner, it creates a group, it creates a site collection. Phase one, every new group, every new team site, and every existing group goes into this new model where you have access to everything SharePoint gives you. Later on, we'll go into the more funky stuff. How are we going to upgrade your existing team sites so that they're connected to groups? Now I got a couple people come up to me and says, Ben, I created all these custom solutions. I've got a form request for our end users to be able to create team sites. We're not ready for groups yet. What's going to happen to me? You can still create independent SharePoint site collections. No worries there. But of course, you won't benefit from all that groups brings to you. Now, the impact on membership is quite important. We have group owners, we have group members. How does that translate to a SharePoint site collection? Who's the site collection administrator, right? Who's the members? And can I remove these? So you can't. If a user is a member of the group, that user will have access to the team site, period. If you didn't want that user to be having access to the team site, you should not put them in the Office 365 group and manage that permission on the SharePoint site level. Instead, it is still a product. It still has everything, features, workflows. It's still SharePoint. Therefore, you still got to manage permissions there that are not necessarily the same as your group membership. Very important to isolate that. And it's going to grow more to than just files, is what we were talking about. We were talking about the document library, and we still need that simpler need. There are still going to be projects and teams that will just need to have that little files experience and not go and start creating workflows and all of that stuff. But they may want later on, and that's the importance of groups. To start with one, and perhaps later in 6 months, we start using the rest. Maybe we'll start using team news. Maybe we'll start using everything else in our wonderful SharePoint. Now, some lessons learned. Be mindful of permissions. What I've had a couple of times is people thinking they're just creating another planner dashboard to be able to organize their cards. Yeah, that has a huge impact. Your group ID and your URL are linked. So definitely be mindful of that as well. The biggest lesson learned, working with people like this guy, the Exchange team, AD team. I didn't have to do that before. I just used it. I just used SharePoint. Now I have to be aware that every time I create a new team site, these guys, they're seeing new emails pop up, and they're not keen on that kind of behavior, are they?
No.
So I have to be mindful of that. I have to start working with Exchange. In fact, here I am on stage with Tony. So we have to start working together to be able to offer these solutions the best that we can. In AD, we're creating new objects as well. If I use the new copy or move, we lose all permissions. There's a copy or move where you can move from a OneDrive for Business to your group's team site. I'll lose my permissions then. I'll lose my metadata. And hey, should I go to groups right now? Is that a question? Of course, let's go for it. Every SharePoint's gonna get a group, every group's gonna get a SharePoint. If it's right for you, even if you're just gonna use the team site, eventually you might want the calendar, you might want the conversations, and of course the announcement of Yammer connected to groups as well, if you prefer the Yammer conversations there. So now we're gonna have to talk about guest users very quickly, Tony.
Thank you, man. Okay, so guest users are, this is the part of groups that allows external people to access groups. Up to now, external people have been able to access groups via email. They've been able to email contributions to the group mailbox, and they would show up as conversations. That's all very well. But you know what? Just as Benjamin and I and Amit had to do for this particular presentation, we needed to actually collaborate around documents. So guest user access, which is this new feature, it's here to allow external users, external people to collaborate more around the documents and the shared notebook. Okay? There are some controls though, because clearly you don't want every user to send out invitations to people all around the planet to come in and share their groups. So there's a couple of things. First thing, AAD settings for the tenant have to allow those sharing invitations to go out. And that's controllable in Office 365 Admin Center. The second thing, clearly because we're talking about documents, SharePoint must be happy. So SharePoint has got to permit sharing of information. The third thing then, you remember that AAD policy we had? Well, it's got a couple of things in there that says whether or not sharing is turned on for this particular tenant, right? And we've got a couple of things that we can play with. One is allow to add groups. That says whether or not group owners can add guest users. And another one then is allow guests to access groups. So can they come in, can those people, when they have received an invitation, can they come in and access groups? You can, the latter one, the one below, the one here, the allow guests to access users, this is the one that you would disable if, for example, you had a massive security breach and you wanted to suddenly cut off all access to external users. You would go and update the policy to set that to false. And you can set even particular sharing on individual groups if you want to do that as well. Okay, how does this all happen? Well, group owners, the people who administer a group, they can go ahead and they can, provided all of that sharing stuff is in place, they can go ahead and they can extend an invitation at any time. And all they need is the email address of that external person, okay? If you're a group member, so you don't have any ownership rights, you don't have any management rights, you can request that the group owner extends an invitation, right? And what will happen is that the recipient of the invitation, the person, if they're using Gmail, they're on some other tenant, if they're on Outlook.com or anything like that, they will get this email. And the email contains a link. It sees that read group files. They click on the link, they will be taken in to SharePoint, and they will be allowed to access the group library. Okay? Important point though, external access does not yet extend to Planner. Okay, there's still some work to be done there. I know a lot of people want to be able to share plans with external people because you've got external consultants, lawyers, whatever, that help in the planning process. It's coming, just stay tight. It will be there very soon. Okay. It's important to know that when an external user comes in, they don't have full access to the group, right? They see a restricted view of the group document library, right? They can't, for example, go and browse your tenant's GAL. That would be very bad because they could go and look up people and find out organizational information, so they can't do that. They can't access the group mailbox to get to conversations. They have a restricted view of group members because, again, you don't want to show out organizational information and so forth and so on. They don't have mobile access. So all of these restrictions are in place to preserve the privacy of your tenant. And what's really been looked for here is just to give you the ability to share documents through the site with people outside of your tenant. However, there is no way to block people. So you can't block on a domain. SharePoint has got its whitelist for domains, which says, I can send invitations out to these particular domains, but not those domains. That whitelist access is not used here. Okay, and there is a particular design access issue I'll plant in your brains. Some people believe that it is much better to only allow external access to specific groups that are designated for that purpose. And the reason is that they don't like the way that an external member has exactly the same document access rights as any other member of the group. They fear that the person could come in and they would have access to all the stuff in the group, whereas you really only want to give them access to a subset of the information in the group. So the easy answer is, if you're in that type of situation, set up specific groups for external sharing and do it like that. Okay, we have a few minutes now on extending groups. Go for it, man.
And again, important to note that guest users can just be added to the SharePoint side without necessarily being added to the entire group.
Yep.
Now, extending groups, we'll talk about connectors. Now, often when I hear about connectors, I've often seen the Twitter example, where a certain search on Twitter will bring the tweets to your Office 365 group's conversations. But there's a lot of scenarios available. In fact, you can create your own connector. One scenario where it makes sense is using applications that actually cost quite a bit for licenses. Internally, we're using certain CRMs and Salesforce costing a lot of money for individual license to be granted. However, what I can do is use a connector that'll bring certain things, whenever a condition is met, will bring as a new conversation in our group. All of the members of the group don't have to have access to that product. the information is sent to us in the group, and as members, we can start conversating around that topic. Trello, Twitter, and so many other possibilities with connectors, of course. Now, of course, there's always the PowerShell commandlets. There are a ton and ton of PowerShell. As Tony mentioned earlier, put a couple examples, but obviously the main focus will be get or set unified groups. Unified groups meaning the new Office 365 groups in PowerShell. And of course, you get the power to extend your group with all the possibilities that SharePoint gives you. There's a new SharePoint framework, apps, scripts from PNP, patterns and practices, tons of capabilities to extend your group and what they can do inside the suite, inside of SharePoint. Now, let's talk a little migration before we finish.
Yep. So migration is always my favorite topic. I'm sure it's your favorite topic. Who hasn't here enjoyed a lovely migration in the past? It's just wonderful. Anyway, so how can we get stuff over to groups? Well, it's a challenging situation because there's no out-of-the-box tools available. I mean, you can't just drag and drop stuff from a mailbox folder and drop it into a shared mailbox. There are a couple of tools, though, coming out in the market, which I think are worthy looking at. One is from Quadratec. It's a tool that's available called Atom. It's available, it's being demoed down the show floor. This will go and scan all those scatty public folders that you have and identify ones that are good candidates. You know, they've got a lot of email traffic, they've been used for shared documents and so forth and so on, and it will move them across to form new Office 365 groups. Binary Tree is also in the market too. They've got a tool called E2E Complete that does some of the same type of thing. Another technique that people have been using is to use the OneDrive for Business Sync client, which is now being upgraded finally at last to be able to deal with SharePoint libraries. You'll be able to go and drag and drop documents on the local drive, and it will go and populate them into the right groups, that kind of thing. And I'm sure that you're going to find there's a whole pile of ISVs that are going to be working in the space. There's a lot of SharePoint ISVs out there in the exhibit hall. Go and talk to them. In terms of migration of distribution groups, there are features available in the admin tools, but only simple distribution groups can be dealt with, right? Only those that contain cloud mailboxes, for example. No other type of recipients. And that's a bit of a problem because classically over the years, Exchange distribution groups have had all sorts of recipients, public folders, other distribution groups, and so forth and so on. However, now, if you look at the Exchange Admin Center, you are able to take those simple distribution groups and we'll have a one-click conversion, and it'll bring it over to an Office 365 groups. Also, Microsoft has got a set of scripts that are available. Just go and do a Google search for them, or sorry, a Bing search for them, and you'll find it. There is a Hummingbird GitHub project, which is also there. You can take the code and adopt it for your own purposes, or you can do what I did, which is just write my own code using PowerShell. And I had a good time, and it's available. Okay, and we're done, and we're going to give a couple of minutes just to wrap and tell us what's happening in groups in the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Benjamin, for sharing your views. There's a lot of stuff happening with groups, and don't worry about it. All of this information, the decks, the links to the articles is available for you, so you can download that thing. This captures a lot of innovation that we have done over the last year based on the feedback and usage we've been hearing from our customers. And you can see on the top of the list the experiences we have added. The connectors, Tony was showing 50, there are 100 now. A month, the developers are building them. The list is growing over there. The guest, if you want to hear more about that, we have a session at 12:45 where we're going to spend deep hour on guest, talk about everything there. When it comes to upcoming innovations, you're seeing the Yammer announced, groups connected to that, SharePoint, team sites, admin with soft delete, preventions, all coming soon this year as part of the roadmap. To summarize all, you have everything to empower your users to collaborate in your organization using groups now. With a bit of planning, with a bit of information that's being shared today, the using groups in your organization is pretty straightforward, so go for it. And if you still need more help, you have Fast Track. Fast Track now supports groups. So you can go and call your Fast Track. There is a lot of, you can go visit fasttrack.microsoft.com and it has a ton of information, videos that you can download and use them for training in your organization. There's a lot of sessions on groups in this Ignite, and the groups team is available at the booth. So if you still have questions, you want to have a one-on-one discussions, please stop by the booth. And thank you again for joining.
Thank you.